They had already moved to close the file when I stood up. 2 years of the inquiry remains open, and we appreciate your patience had taught me exactly how long Dranic conquered patience lasts, and it lasted exactly as long as it took the first adjudicator to read one line into the record, incident closed, no further action, before reaching for the next docket. I was not on the speaker's list. I was not, technically, anyone, just the sister of a man whose name they had just finished erasing. My brother Talon had spent 11 years as a compact envoy assigned to Calder's Reach, a mining colony built on top of something older, a pre-collapse ruin the locals called the Drowned Vault, half-flooded, half-buried, and worth more to the conquered than every mineral claim on the surface combined. He wasn't a soldier. He didn't carry weapons or threats. He carried treaty language, and for 11 years that was enough to keep Calder's Reach a free colony instead of a labor camp. Then the conquered found a faster way to harvest the vault: human divers. Rotation 9, they called it volunteers, the paperwork said, working 4-hour shifts at depths the conquered's own engineering office had flagged as unsafe 18 months earlier. Talon refused to certify it. He filed the refusal himself, in writing, under his own seal, 3 days before he went missing during what the report called a routine inspection dive. They ruled it an accident. Equipment failure, the kind that happens in deep water. I read that finding so many times I could recite it without looking, which was useful, because for 2 years that was the only thing anyone in this chamber was willing to give me. Letters went unanswered. Hearing dates slid by a season at a time. The conquered has a particular gift for making grief feel like an administrative backlog, and I had stopped expecting anything from this room except more of the same. I am not a diplomat. I run cargo manifests for a transit cooperative on Calder's Reach, the kind of work that puts you in rooms with conquered shipping clerks often enough to learn how their paperwork actually moves, which turned out to matter more than any treaty language ever could have. Talon used to tease me about it, said I'd make a better envoy than he was because I never let a closed file stay closed. He was usually right about things like that. I had one thing the report didn't account for. Talon's dive gear used a personal data core, the kind every envoy carries to log treaty conversations off the record. Conquered salvage crews recovered it from the wreck site 11 months ago and listed it, in their own inventory, as non-functional. I bought it back through a Calder's Reach broker who didn't ask why a conquered part was for sale. It took the better part of a year and most of my savings to get a compact technician to coax anything out of the casing, working in spare hours between his actual assignments, because nothing about my request was official enough to put on the books. What came out was 26 seconds. I walked it to the rail myself. The chamber was the kind built to make a person feel small on purpose, tiered seating wrapping the whole curved hall, a glass dome 200 meters overhead pouring gray daylight onto marble that had never once needed cleaning. 500 counselors looked down at me the way they looked at everything from outside, which is to say they mostly didn't, until I set the data core on the rail, and the chamber's ambient systems caught the broadcast signature and played it without being asked. A junior procedural officer near the dais tried to object before the recording finished: irrelevant, unauthenticated, a closed matter, and the first adjudicator, more out of habit than interest, was already nodding along with him when the voice on the recording said my brother's full registry name and rank, and the chamber's own verification system chimed the authentication green across every display in the hall at once. The objection died somewhere in the officer's throat, and he sat back down without anyone telling him to. 26 seconds of Talon's voice, recorded the morning he disappeared, statting for the log that he was filing a second refusal, that he had photographed the safety variance reports himself, and that if anything happened to him on this dive, the compact's automatic continuity protocol would treat his data core's loss of signal as proof of bad faith, and act accordingly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I said 4 words: you should have listened. The first adjudicator's mouth opened, and nothing came out of it for what felt like a very long time. Around her, the chamber did what 500 people do when they all understand the same sentence at once. A wave of motion with no single shape to it, robes shifting, hands reaching for instruments nobody had thought to check in 2 years because nobody had wanted to. Someone finally checked. The continuity protocol Talon mentioned wasn't bluster. It was real, it was compact law, and it had a name buried 4 layers deep in a treaty annex nobody at the Concord had bothered to read past the summary line. Automatic forward deployment. Triggered the instant an envoy's authenticated data core registered terminal signal loss without a corresponding all clear from compact command. A clerk near the records wall pulled the annex up on a side display, read 3 lines of it, and went very still in a way that made 2 counselors near her lean over to see for themselves. One of them asked her twice to confirm she was reading it correctly. She was. Talon's core had gone dark the day he disappeared. Compact Command had logged it the same day. The clock the Concord didn't know was running had been running for 731 days. A junior aide near the back of the chamber was the one who looked up from her own display first, face gone the color the local elders go when the blood actually leaves it. She didn't speak. She turned her screen toward the dome instead, where the chamber's external feed, usually showing nothing but daylight and cloud, had quietly populated with hull silhouettes. Not a patrol, not an escort. A full deployment, holding station in the bright sky directly above the chamber, close enough that the dome's glass threw faint shadow lines across the marble floor whenever a ship drifted between us and the sun. They had been there, I learned later, for 6 days, holding position, running no active scans, broadcasting no demands, doing absolutely nothing that would have tripped a Concord sensor net built to watch for aggression and blind to patience. Waiting, the way the protocol's authors had apparently designed it to wait, for someone to finally open the file. The first adjudicator tried, late and badly, to recover the room, called for a recess, called for verification through Concord's own channels, called at one point for someone to simply turn the dome's external feed off. Nobody moved to do it. By then half the chamber had already seen it for themselves, and you cannot unsee 500 kilometers of hull plating sitting patiently over your own ceiling, no matter how many times you ask a junior officer to find the switch. I watched her hands because I'd been watching them since I sat down, and she still hadn't found anything to do with them. She set down the docket she'd been about to call. She looked at the dome. She looked back at me. "This was never about the dive logs," I said. It was the only other thing I said in that chamber, and I made sure it landed slow. "It was about how long it would take you to read something my brother already wrote down for you." Nobody answered that. Nobody tried. I'm told the formal session ran another 4 hours after I left. Motions, recesses, 2 separate calls to Compact Command that I wasn't in the room for and don't need to have been. A standing committee was formed by evening to determine whether Rotation 9's full personnel logs needed to be released, which is the Concord's particular way of admitting, very slowly, that they already knew the answer. None of it changed the math. The protocol doesn't ask permission, and it doesn't negotiate. It executes, and it had been executing quietly for almost 2 years before anyone in that hall understood they were already standing inside its second phase. I don't know what they'll call it in their own records. Incident, escalation, miscalculation. They'll find a tidy word for it eventually, the way they found accident for my brother. I know what I call it. I call it the morning the Concord finally finished reading a file it had decided 2 years earlier wasn't worth opening, and looked up through their own glass ceiling to find out exactly how long humanity had already been waiting for them too. Somewhere in the records they're still drafting. There's a line about a civilian observer who interrupted a closing docket. They can write it however they like. I was there for one reason, and it had nothing to do with their protocol or their fleet. I was there so my brother's last 26 seconds would finally be heard by the people who'd spent 2 years pretending they hadn't caused them.